3 days after my surgery, when I could barely walk, my daughter-in-law called. "You're home doing nothing anyway," she said. "Watch my kids for a week." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, still dizzy from the painkillers, wondering if I'd heard her right. My house still smelled like antiseptic, my body still stitched together, and she thought I was her babysitter. That call changed everything. Because by the time she came back from her vacation, I wasn't just a grandmother recovering from surgery. I was a woman with a plan and proof. They told me to rest after my surgery, but life didn't wait. 3 days after I got home, I was still sore and moving slow when the phone rang. It was my daughter-in-law, Melissa. "Hey, you're home doing nothing anyway, right?" "I'm dropping the kids off for the week. Daniel and I need a break. We're flying to Costa Rica." Before I could answer, she hung up. Just like that. I sat there holding the phone, not sure if I should laugh or cry. I had just come out of the hospital. My chest still hurt every time I breathed, and yet she thought I was her babysitter. I've learned not to expect much from Melissa. She married my son 15 years ago, and from day one, I could tell she saw me as help, not family. She always said the right things in public, called me mom, sent me flowers on my birthday, but her eyes told a different story. She looked at me like I was something old she had to tolerate. I used to argue with Daniel about it, but he always said the same thing. "Mom, she's trying. Don't make things harder." So I stopped saying anything. I didn't want to be the reason for tension in their marriage. After the call, I just sat there for a while. The pain medicine made me dizzy, and I had to hold on to the chair so I wouldn't fall. I thought about my husband, Frank. He's been gone for 10 years now. We worked the same job all our lives. He taught history, and I was the school nurse. We raised Daniel with love and structure. We weren't perfect, but we tried. If Frank were here, he would have shaken his head and said, "Evelyn, you always carry other people's burdens." Maybe he'd be right. But this time I didn't choose it. It was dropped on me. A few hours later, I heard a car outside. When I opened the door, there she was, Melissa, standing there like she owned the place. Her phone was in one hand, her keys in the other. Behind her were the kids, Olivia, 13, tall and quiet, Ethan, 8, small for his age, and little Sophie, only 5, clutching a stuffed bunny that looked like it had seen better days. "Here they are," Melissa said like she was making a delivery. "Olivia knows how to make sandwiches. Ethan wets the bed sometimes, but you probably have old plastic sheets, right? Sophie just needs cartoons. We'll be back next Sunday." I stared at her. "Melissa, I just had heart surgery. I can barely get around the house." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you love having them. It'll be fine. They mostly take care of themselves. You'll see." Then she kissed the air, turned around and walked away. No instructions, no medicine list, not even a goodbye hug for the kids. The car started, and before I could think of what to say, she was gone. The kids stood there in silence. Olivia's eyes were fixed on the floor. Ethan tried to act brave, but I could see his lip tremble. Sophie hid behind her sister's leg, holding her bunny tight. "Well," I said finally, trying to sound calm, "I guess it's just us this week." That's when Olivia spoke. Her voice was small but clear. "Grandma, are you mad?" I said, "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad." But I was. Not at them. At the situation. At the fact that their parents thought this was normal. I helped them bring their bags inside. 2 trash bags, actually, not even proper luggage. Clothes, some toys, a few snacks. No toothbrushes, no pajamas. I wanted to cry. I made them sandwiches, just peanut butter and jelly. Nothing fancy, but they ate like they hadn't had a real meal in days. Ethan finished his in seconds. Sophie licked the jelly off her fingers and looked embarrassed about it. Olivia tried to slow down, probably to act polite, but I could tell she was starving too. When they were done, I asked, "When did you last eat something hot?" Olivia shrugged. "Mom orders food sometimes, mostly cereal or noodles." I looked at her. "Does your dad know?" "He's always working," she said. "Mom says he's tired." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just lazy parenting, something deeper. I could see it in the way Olivia tried to protect her siblings, the way Ethan flinched when I reached for a napkin too quickly, the way Sophie wouldn't let go of that bunny. I tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Let's get you cleaned up and ready for bed," I said. Olivia helped her brother and sister without being asked. She even folded their clothes neatly on a chair. I stood there watching, realizing this child had been raising them by herself for years. When they were finally asleep, I sat in the hallway outside the spare room. I could hear Ethan's soft breathing, Sophie's small snores, Olivia whispering a bedtime story to calm them. I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't. He wouldn't hear it, not from me. Instead, I took my notebook from the kitchen drawer and wrote down everything that happened that day. I wrote the time she called, the exact words she said, the way the children looked when they arrived. Old habits die hard, once a nurse, always a recorder. It felt strange to be alone again after they fell asleep. The house was too quiet, but in that quiet, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let those children be treated like this anymore. Not by their mother, not by my son, not by anyone. People think that when you get old, you get soft, that you forget how to fight. But they're wrong. Age doesn't take away your strength. It just hides it until you need it again. That night, I sat at the table with my cup of tea that had gone cold, staring at the clock. I whispered to myself, they said rest heals the heart, but mine's about to be tested again. And I meant it. Melissa didn't even pretend to care that day. She showed up wearing her workout clothes, phone in one hand, a strong smell of perfume that filled the doorway. She didn't step inside. She just pushed the kids toward me and said, "Here they are," like she was dropping off the packages. Before I could say a word, she turned around and walked back to her car. The sound of her heels faded down the steps. The engine started, and she was gone. She didn't look back, not even once. The 3 children stood in my living room, small and quiet. Olivia was 13, but she looked older, tired, with dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Ethan, 8, held his backpack close to his chest and didn't say a word. And Sophie, the little one, only 5, clung to Olivia's skirt, her face half hidden. I smiled and said softly, "Hi, sweethearts. I'm Grandma. You remember me, right?" Olivia nodded politely, but there was no warmth in it. Ethan just stared at the floor. Sophie peeked out for a second, then hid again. They weren't shy, they were scared. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Let's get you inside. I'll fix us something to eat." They followed me to the kitchen without a sound. No laughter, no talking, not even the kind of noise you'd expect from kids who hadn't seen their grandma in a while. Just silence. I opened the fridge and realized how unprepared I was. There wasn't much. A few vegetables, some bread, milk, eggs. I made a simple vegetable soup and grilled a few slices of bread. Nothing special, but it smelled warm and homey. When I set the bowls in front of them, they hesitated. Olivia looked at me first, almost like she was waiting for permission. I said, "Go ahead, it's for you." That was all it took. They started eating, quietly at first, then faster. Olivia tried to be polite, keeping her back straight like she'd been told to mind her manners, but the way she finished her bowl told me she hadn't had a real meal in a while. Ethan didn't look up once. He just kept his eyes on the food, chewing fast, as if someone might take it away. Sophie fell asleep halfway through her soup, her small hand still wrapped around the spoon. It broke me. Olivia noticed me watching and froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Grandma," she whispered, "can we eat tomorrow too?" I didn't know what to say. My throat closed up. I reached out and touched her arm gently. "Of course, sweetheart. You'll eat every day from now on. I promise." She looked down, and I swear I saw relief, the kind that comes from a child who's been holding too much inside. Ethan checked the clock on the wall several times while he ate, like he was afraid he'd get in trouble for taking too long. When I asked if everything was okay, he said quickly, "Mom says we shouldn't take too long eating. It makes her late for her classes." Classes. That's what Melissa called her yoga. And wellness sessions. She had plenty of time for those. After dinner, I helped Sophie change into one of my old t-shirts since she didn't have pajamas. Olivia folded the little dress carefully and said, "Mom says we have to keep our clothes clean because we don't know when we'll get new ones." That sentence stayed in my head long after she said it. When I went to check on Ethan, he was standing by the window holding his backpack like it was something precious. I asked if he wanted me to put it down for him. He shook his head quickly. "No, it's fine." I didn't push. Something told me not to. Later that night, I found out why. When I checked again, Ethan had fallen asleep hugging the backpack. It wasn't full of toys or clothes. It was packed with snacks. Crackers, candy wrappers, a half-empty juice box. He was saving food. That's when I realized they weren't just visiting me. They were surviving me. I stood in the doorway for a long time watching them sleep. Sophie curled up between her brother and sister, clutching her bunny, thumb still in her mouth. Olivia's arm rested over them protectively, even in her sleep. She looked like a mother, not a child. I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak so deep it made my chest ache. Anger at Melissa, yes, but also at my son. How could Daniel not see what was happening? How could he let his children live like this? I went into the kitchen and started cleaning up the dishes, more to keep my hands busy than anything else. I could still hear Olivia's voice in my head. "Grandma, can we eat tomorrow too?" No child should ever have to ask that. When everything was quiet, I went back to the room and pulled the blanket up over them. Ethan stirred but didn't wake. I brushed Olivia's hair gently away from her face. Then I stepped outside the door and leaned against the wall. The tears came before I could stop them. Quiet, angry tears. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I was furious. Because my son, the boy I raised to be kind and responsible, had become a man who couldn't see his own children falling apart. I thought of the years I spent telling Daniel that family comes first, and now, here I was, cleaning up the mess of the family he built. That night, as I sat in my chair, I thought about calling him. I even picked up the phone once. But what would I say? That his wife abandoned their kids while I could barely walk? That his children were hungry and scared? He wouldn't believe me. He'd defend her, like he always did. So I put the phone down. Instead, I looked at the clock, wrote down what happened in my notebook, the time, the words, the way the kids looked, and promised myself something. If I couldn't make Daniel see the truth, I'd make the world see it for him. I turned off the lights and checked the kids one more time. The room was quiet except for their breathing. Sophie's hand twitched in sleep still, gripping her bunny. And that was when it hit me. Hunger isn't always about food. Sometimes it's about love. That night, I realized those kids weren't starving because of empty plates. They were starving because no one had loved them properly in a very long time. That night, I realized hunger isn't always about food. Sometimes it's about love. The next morning, I woke up early. It wasn't because I slept well. I hadn't slept at all. My mind kept replaying the night before, the sound of little hands scraping the bowls clean, Olivia's soft voice asking if they could eat tomorrow too. I made breakfast quietly. Oatmeal, toast, and apples. Simple. By the time I finished, the kids were already awake. Olivia helped Ethan and Sophie get dressed. She brushed Sophie's hair and tied it with one of her own old hairbands. She shouldn't have been the one doing that. After breakfast, I started making the beds. Ethan had folded his blanket neatly. Sophie's pillow was upside down, covered in drool. And Olivia's? Well, Olivia had tried to make her bed like an adult, neat and tight. But when I lifted her pillow, something slipped out and fell to the floor. It was a small piece of folded paper, crumpled, soft from being handled too much. I thought maybe it was a note from school, but when I opened it, I stopped breathing. "Please tell someone we're not okay." 7 words, written in a child's shaky handwriting. My hands trembled. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it. The letters weren't angry or messy. They were careful. Like whoever wrote them was afraid of getting caught. I read it again. And again. "Please tell someone we're not okay." I knew it was Olivia's handwriting. I'd seen her write thank you notes before when they visited during the holidays. But this wasn't a thank you note. This was a cry for help. I felt the sting of tears, but I didn't cry. I'd been here before. Not this exact moment, but something close. Years ago, when I was still working as a school nurse, one of my students, a quiet girl named Angie, slipped a note into my bag. It said, "My stepdad hurts me when Mom isn't home." I was supposed to report it, and I did. But before anyone acted, the family moved away. A few months later, I read about her in the paper. She'd been taken to a group home after another teacher found bruises on her. I never saw her again. That memory came rushing back so hard I could barely breathe. I looked at the note in my hand and whispered, "Not again." I folded it back carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Then I went to find my phone. When I called Nora, I didn't even say hello. "Nora, it's me," I said, my voice shaking. "I think Melissa's hurting them." There was silence on the other end for a second. Then that familiar, steady voice. "All right, slow down. Tell me what happened." I told her about the kids, the bruises I'd noticed on Ethan's arm when he reached for his bowl, the way Olivia flinched when I spoke too loud, the letter. Nora sighed. "You always had good instincts, Evelyn. And if you're right, those children need someone in their corner." I could hear papers shuffling in the background. She was already taking notes like she used to when she worked cases. "Nora," I said, quietly, "I don't know what to do. I just got out of the hospital. I can't even drive yet." "You don't have to," she said. "You just start keeping track. Write everything down. What they say, how they act, what you see. Pictures, dates, times, everything. We'll build proof before anyone gets hurt more." Her calmness steadied me. I could always count on Nora to think clearly. We'd known each other since our 30s. She'd spent 30 years in the police department before she retired. I spent 40 in nursing. Between the two of us, we'd seen enough broken people to know when something wasn't right. "Thank you," I said softly. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "If this gets ugly, you'll need to be ready for a fight." "I've been fighting my whole life," I said. "Just not like this." After we hung up, I sat there with my notebook open. I wrote down the date, the time, and the exact words from the letter. Then I described everything I could remember from the past 24 hours. How hungry the kids were, the way Olivia checked on her siblings, the stains on their clothes, the fact that Melissa hadn't called once to check in. The more I wrote, the angrier I became. It wasn't just neglect, it was absence. Emotional absence. And from what I'd seen, Daniel had chosen to look the other way. When the kids got home from school that afternoon, I tried to act normal. I made snacks and asked about their day. Olivia said the teacher gave them new reading homework. Ethan said he got picked last for soccer, but didn't seem to care. Sophie showed me a drawing she'd made. It was of 3 stick figures holding hands. 1 tall, 2 small. She said, "That's me, Olivia, and you, Grandma." I didn't see a single parent in the picture. That night after dinner, when they were brushing their teeth, I caught Olivia watching me. There was a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. "Olivia," I said gently, "did you write me a note?" She froze. Then her eyes filled with tears. "You weren't supposed to find it," she whispered. "Sweetheart," I said, "I did find it, and I read it, and I believe you." She shook her head, crying harder. "Please don't tell Mom. She'll be mad. She says we make her look bad when we complain." I pulled her into my arms. She stiffened at first, then melted into the hug like she hadn't been held in a long time. "No one's going to hurt you here," I said firmly. "Not while you're with me." She nodded against my shoulder, but I could feel her trembling. After she went to bed, I stood by the doorway again, watching all 3 of them sleeping together in that small bed. Olivia's arm draped protectively over her siblings, Ethan's hand clutching his backpack again. Sophie curled up in a ball, her bunny beside her. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. I walked back to the kitchen and took out the letter again. Those words stared up at me like they were alive. "Please tell someone we're not okay." I whispered, "I'm telling someone now, sweetheart. I'm telling everyone I need to." Later that night, Nora texted me. "Got your message. I'll come by tomorrow. We'll start documenting everything." I set the phone down and looked around the house. It used to feel empty before the kids came. Now it felt full. Not of laughter, not of warmth, but of purpose. I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to fail these kids like I failed that student years ago. That night the sea was calm, but my soul wasn't. The morning after Nora and I spoke, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and a cup of tea that had already gone cold. I'd been writing down everything, what the kids ate, what they said, what I noticed. I didn't know what would matter later, so I wrote it all. Olivia was helping Ethan with his homework, and Sophie was coloring beside them, humming quietly. Watching them like that made me ache. They looked peaceful, but under it all, there was still fear. The kind that doesn't go away overnight. Around noon, I saw movement through the kitchen window, a figure walking along the path toward the old lighthouse across from my house. I knew that silhouette anywhere. Thomas Reed. Thomas had lived in the lighthouse since his wife passed away 10 years ago. 75, thin, a bit gruff, and stubborn as ever. Some people thought he was odd, living alone with nothing but seagulls and waves for company. But Thomas was sharp, observant. He saw everything that happened along this coast. I decided to visit him. Maybe a walk would help me think. When I knocked on the door of the lighthouse, it took a while before he opened. His face was lined deeper than I remembered, his gray hair sticking out under an old fisherman's cap. "Well, look who's up and walking again," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Heart still ticking?" Barely, I said, but strong enough for tea if you have some. He laughed. Come in then. Haven't had company in a while. Inside, the place was simple, worn wooden floors, an old kettle whistling on the stove, photos of his wife and kids on a shelf. I'd been there a few times years ago, but now it felt heavier, filled with silence that had lasted too long. We sat by the small table near the window that faced the ocean. He poured the tea and said, "So, what brings you here, Evelyn? You never just drop by without a reason." I hesitated. "You ever see my grandkids around? Daniel's children?" Thomas looked at me for a long second, then sighed. "Yeah, I've seen them. Didn't want to say anything unless you asked." He took a sip of tea, set his cup down, and leaned back. "That woman of his, what's her name?" "Melissa," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, that one." He rubbed his chin and said, "Last winter she brought the kids out here. It was freezing. One of those mornings when the wind cuts through your coat. She parked near the lighthouse and started doing her yoga nonsense, the kind people film for those online videos. The kids were standing by the car, shivering. I went out and told her to get them inside. You know what she said?" I shook my head. She said, "They're fine. It's good for their immune system." His voice hardened. "Evelyn, it was below freezing. I gave the boy my spare gloves. She didn't even thank me. Just rolled her eyes and told me not to interfere." My stomach turned. "She left. Them outside?" He nodded. "For almost an hour. I have pictures." He reached into a drawer and pulled out an old phone. The screen was cracked, but he scrolled until he found what he was looking for. Then he turned it toward me. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. Olivia stood beside the car, arms wrapped around her little sister. Ethan's head was down, his hands buried in his pockets. All three looked frozen, cheeks red, lips blue. And in the corner of the frame, Melissa, smiling at her camera, doing a yoga pose against the sunrise. I covered my mouth. "Oh my God. People think I'm a cranky old man with too much time," he said, "but I take pictures for a reason. Nobody believes you unless you can show them." He slid the phone closer to me. "You keep that one. I've got it backed up. Might come in handy." I stared at the photo again. My hands shook, not from weakness this time, but from anger. "Thomas," I said softly, "you may have just given me the first real piece of proof." He nodded. "Good. Those kids deserve better. I see a lot from up here. You'd be surprised what light reveals when people think no one's watching." We sat quietly for a while, sipping tea. The sound of waves hitting the rocks filled the space between us. After a long pause, Thomas spoke again, his voice lower now. People think this lighthouse exists to save sailors, but that's not always true." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked out the window toward the water. "Sometimes light doesn't save. It exposes, shows where the wrecks are, where the damage really is. Without light, you'd never know what's been broken." I thought about that, about how much had been hidden behind closed doors, under smiles and pretty family photos. "Then maybe," I said slowly, "it's time we turned that light toward my family." Thomas looked at me, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Now that's the Evelyn I remember, tough as nails." "I'm not tough," I said, shaking my head, "just tired of pretending things are fine when they're not." He leaned back and smiled. "That's what makes you dangerous, The quiet ones always are." Before I left, he handed me a USB drive. "More pictures," he said. "Not just that day. I've seen her leave the kids in the car before. Figured someone might need to know someday." I tucked it into my pocket carefully. "You're a good man, Thomas." He laughed softly. "Don't spread that rumor. I've got a reputation to keep." I smiled, but inside I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Resolve. Real, solid resolve. For weeks I'd been weak, recovering, fragile. But now I had something to fight with. Something to fight for. When I got home, I called Nora. "We have a witness," I said. "And pictures." She didn't sound surprised. "Then it's time to move fast. I'll come tomorrow. We'll start the report." After we hung up, I stood by the window looking out at the lighthouse. Its beams swept across the water in slow, steady circles, cutting through the dark like it always did. For years, I'd watched that light and felt small, like it was there for other people, the lost ones, the sailors, the broken, But that night, as the beam passed over my house and lit the window where the kids were sleeping, I realized something. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the storm. That night, after the call with Nora, I sat in my living room with my laptop open, the glow from the screen lighting up the dark room. The kids were asleep, and for the first time all day, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I thought about Thomas's photo, about Melissa smiling in front of the sunrise, while her children froze behind her. Something about that image stuck in my head. It wasn't just neglect, it was performance. Melissa didn't live her life, she filmed it. Out of curiosity, I typed her name into the search bar. Her channel popped up immediately. Melissa Cares Wellness. Over 300,000 subscribers. I felt my stomach twist. The first video on the page was titled Perfect Mom Morning Routine. I clicked it. There she was, flawless makeup, hair tied up, sunlight pouring in through a spotless kitchen window. "Hi, loves," she said in that sweet voice I'd heard her use only online. "Today I'm showing you how I start every morning with gratitude, green juice, and love for my family." I almost laughed. Gratitude? Green juice? Then came the part that made my hands clench. She turned the camera toward the hallway and called out, "Kids, breakfast is ready." I could see Sophie in the background, her hair neat and brushed, wearing a little pink sweater. Melissa leaned down, hugged her for the camera, then turned the lens back on herself and smiled. Being a mom is my greatest joy. I paused the video. My heart was pounding. Because I knew exactly when that video had been filmed. 2 weeks before she dropped the kids at my house. And I knew the truth. That same morning, Olivia had told me they'd eaten instant noodles for breakfast, that Sophie had cried because there was no milk, that Ethan had said, "Mom's too busy filming." While the world watched a woman pretending to be a perfect mother, her children were surviving off leftovers. I clicked on another video, Family Dinner Goals. Melissa sat at the head of the table, laughing, holding a glass of wine while Daniel sat beside her, smiling awkwardly. The camera panned across 3 plates of food that looked untouched. It was all fake. Every single part. Every perfect moment was a lie. And people loved it. The comments were full of strangers saying, You're such an inspiration, and I wish I could be a mom like you." I stared at the screen, at the rows of hearts and emojis, and felt sick. I opened my notebook and started writing the upload dates next to the times Olivia had told me about their meals, their days, their loneliness. It all lined up. While she was filming her perfect life, the kids were hungry, cold, and afraid. I scrolled through more videos. The family vacation in Florida. Olivia said they spent the whole trip in the hotel while their mother filmed. The cozy winter morning vlog. That was the same week Thomas saw them freezing by the car. Melissa didn't just lie. She built a world out of lies and made money from it. For a few minutes, I just sat there watching her smile through the screen. Then, without a word, I started saving everything. Every video, every photo, every fake happy family post. I downloaded them one by one, labeling each with the date and title. It took hours. I didn't care. Around midnight, I opened a new message and sent them to Nora. I attached the folder along with a note. If lies can go viral, maybe truth can too. A few minutes later, Nora texted back, "Perfect. Keep copies. I'll start pulling timestamps. This woman's about to meet the real version of herself." I leaned back in my chair, exhausted, but beneath the exhaustion, I felt something sharper. A kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. People like Melissa built glass castles online. Pretty, shiny, hollow, and everyone applauded while pretending not to see the cracks. But cracks always spread. I looked over at the kids' room. The light from my laptop spilled across the floor, catching on Sophie's stuffed bunny lying near the door. For a second, I thought about turning off the computer, letting someone else handle it. Then I remembered that note under the pillow. "Please tell someone we're not okay." And I knew stopping wasn't an option. The world loved Melissa's version of the truth, the filtered, polished, picture-perfect version. But if she could use the internet to hide her lies, maybe I could use it to uncover them. It was time to pull back the curtain. The next morning, when I told Nora what I'd found, she whistled low. 300,000 followers, she said. That's not a mom. That's a brand. A brand built on her children's pain, I said. She'll fight hard to protect it, Nora warned. People like that always do. But don't worry, we'll make sure she fights with the truth staring right back at her. I nodded. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the storm that was coming, or how ready I suddenly felt for it. That evening I stood by the window again, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The lighthouse beam swept across the sea like a slow heartbeat, and I whispered to myself, "It's time to let the internet see what it refused to look at." It was time to let the internet see what it refused to look at. Nora showed up the next morning with a manila folder under her arm and a look that told me she hadn't slept either. She didn't bother with greetings. "Coffee first," she said, heading straight for the kitchen like she still lived there. I poured 2 mugs. We sat across from each other at my old wooden table, the same one where Frank used to grade papers and I used to help Daniel with homework. This time it wasn't for schoolwork, it was for war. "All right," Nora said, flipping open her folder. "Here's what we've got. Your notes, Thomas's photos, and the videos from her so-called wellness empire. It's enough to get the attention of Child Protective Services, but if we want this to stick, we need to be smart." She spread the papers out between us. The sight of them made my stomach twist. So much proof. So much hurt in black and white. I nodded slowly. "So, what's the plan?" "We build a case like the detectives used to," she said. "You keep your journal going. Pictures, timestamps, everything. I'll start reaching out. Social services, legal aid, maybe a few reporters I still trust. Quietly for now. We don't want her to catch wind before we're ready." It felt strange hearing her talk like that again. Steady, methodical, all business. I could see a flicker of the woman she used to be, the detective who once took down a trafficking ring single-handedly because she refused to let a file go cold. "And what about Daniel?" I asked quietly. "He's still her husband. He'll defend her." "Then we make sure he can't," she said simply. "We show him the truth in a way he can't ignore." I sighed. "We're 2 old women against a whole internet, Nora." She grinned. "Then we better be louder than silence." We started right then. She taught me how to back up files on a flash drive, how to upload photos to the cloud, how to label folders in ways even she could understand later. I'd always been better with pen and paper than screens, but she was patient. At one point, she muttered, "If someone told me I'd spend my retirement teaching Evelyn Carter how to use Google Drive, I'd have retired sooner." I laughed. "You'd think 2 grandmothers could outsmart 1 influencer." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we will. We've raised families, buried husbands, paid mortgages, and lived through dial-up internet. This woman doesn't stand a chance." That made me smile, not because it was funny, but because it felt like hope. We spent hours organizing the evidence, every note, every picture, every timestamp. Nora typed faster than I thought someone her age could. I could barely keep up with her. When we got to the part where Melissa had filmed Perfect Mom morning routine, Nora stopped typing and looked up. 300,000 people watched this garbage, she said. 300,000. And not one of them saw what was missing. I added, "That's how lies work. People only see what they're shown." She nodded. "That's about to change." At one point, she pulled out a small camera from her bag, sleek, silver, clearly new. "What's that?" I asked. "Hidden camera," she said. "Motion activated. Catches sound and video. I brought 2. We'll put 1 by your front door and 1 near the kids' room, just in case she comes back early or tries something stupid." I blinked. "You had these lying around?" She smirked. "I told you retirement's boring." The next 2 hours were pure comedy. 2 grandmothers crouched behind furniture, squinting at instruction manuals, arguing over Wi-Fi passwords. I had to sit down twice just from laughing. At one point, Nora said, "You think they'll ever make cameras that set themselves up?" "They already did," I said, "but we're too stubborn to read the instructions." By the time we finished, the cameras were up, the files were backed up twice, and I'd learned more about technology in one day than I had in the last decade. When I finally sat back, exhausted but satisfied, Nora raised her mug of lukewarm coffee. To old women with Wi-Fi and nothing left to lose. I clinked my mug against hers. And to children who finally get to sleep without fear. After she left, I sat alone at the table, surrounded by folders, cables, and the faint hum of my laptop. The house didn't feel quiet this time. It felt alive. I looked through the window toward the lighthouse. Its beam swung in a slow circle, lighting up the waves and the shore, one steady pulse at a time. Thomas's words came back to me. Light doesn't just save sailors. It exposes wrecks. Maybe this was what exposure looked like. 2 aging women in a kitchen, piecing together justice from screenshots and scribbled notes. It didn't look heroic, but maybe heroism never did. I thought of Melissa's fake smiles, of Olivia's trembling voice, of that note under the pillow. Nora had said it right. We were two old women against a whole internet. But we also had something the internet didn't: patience, purpose, and the kind of rage that only comes when you've seen too much to stay quiet. We didn't have youth, or followers, or money. We had truth. And as it turned out, truth was louder than any lie. That night before bed, I walked past the kids' room one last time. They were all asleep, Sophie sprawled sideways, Ethan snoring softly, Olivia holding the stuffed bunny close. I smiled. "Sleep easy, my loves," I whispered. "Your grandmas are working the night shift." Back in the kitchen, I wrote the day's notes in my journal. The handwriting was messy, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were finally doing something. When I closed the notebook, I looked toward the lighthouse again. The beam passed over my window, bright and unwavering. We had wrinkles, we had arthritis, but we also had an unstoppable plan. I waited 3 days before calling Daniel. Part of me hoped he'd reach out first, maybe check in, ask about the kids, pretend to care, but he didn't, not a single message. Every day, I wrote in my notebook, logged photos, and helped Olivia with her homework. Sophie drew me new pictures for the fridge, and Ethan started sleeping through the night again. Slowly, the house began to sound like a home. Laughter in the mornings, little footsteps on the stairs. It was strange how peace could grow in the middle of a storm, but every time I saw their faces, I thought of Daniel. My son. The boy who used to run down these same stairs shouting, "Mom, look what I built," with Lego towers taller than he was. Now, he was a man who couldn't see that his own children were breaking. So that night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I took a deep breath and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice tired. I could hear traffic in the background. "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," I said quietly. A pause. "What's wrong now?" That tone, half defensive, half impatient, made my chest tighten. I could picture his hand rubbing his forehead, already irritated that I dared to interrupt his busy schedule. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I need to talk to you about Melissa." He groaned. "Mom, please. Not this again." "This isn't about me not liking her," I said. "It's about your children." Another sigh. "Melissa's been under a lot of stress. You know how hard she works, how much pressure she's under with her channel. She's trying, Mom." I clenched my jaw. "Trying?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Daniel, do you even know where your children have been eating this week?" He hesitated. "Melissa said you offered to watch them while she took a short trip. I thought it'd be good for everyone." "A short trip?" I repeated. "She dropped them here without asking. I was barely out of the hospital. She didn't leave clothes, food, or instructions. And you know what your daughter said to me her first night here?" "Mom." "She asked me if they get to eat again tomorrow." The silence on the line was heavy. I pressed on before I could lose my nerve. "Daniel, they're hungry. They're scared. They don't know what real care feels like anymore. Olivia puts them to bed, not Melissa. She cooks their meals, not Melissa. That little girl is raising your family while her mother makes videos for strangers." "Mom, please stop exaggerating," he said finally. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath. Embarrassment, maybe anger. "Melissa's overwhelmed, that's all. You're misreading things." I felt something inside me snap. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling, "do you know your daughter left a letter under her pillow? A letter begging for help?" Nothing. For a long moment, there was just silence. No breathing, no sound, just space between us, the kind that hurts. Then he said quietly, "I think you've let this get to you too much. You've always been dramatic, Mom. You mean well, but you blow things out of proportion." And then he hung up. I stared at the phone like it was something I didn't recognize. My own son had just called me dramatic. My son. The same boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and trust that I could fix anything. I sat there for a long time, listening to the clock tick, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark window. Eventually I got up and walked to the shelf where the old photo albums were. I pulled one out, the blue one, the one with Daniel's childhood pictures. On the first page, there was a photo of him at 6 years old, sitting on his father's shoulders, laughing with his arms out like wings. I remembered that day. Frank had just finished mowing the lawn, and Daniel insisted on helping. He dumped grass all over himself, and Frank laughed so hard he couldn't stand. I traced the edge of the picture with my finger. Frank had been a good man. Flawed, strict sometimes, but good. He'd believed in doing right even when it was hard. And now, our son, his son, had become someone Frank wouldn't recognize. He's turning into a man his father wouldn't recognize, I whispered to the empty room. That realization cut deeper than anything Melissa could ever say to me. Later that night, I told Nora what happened. She listened quietly, no interruptions. When I finished, she said, "He's scared, Evelyn. Not of you, of the truth. It's easier to call you dramatic than to face what he's ignored." "I know," I said, "but knowing doesn't make it hurt less." She nodded. "He'll come around when he has no choice. Until then, we keep building the case. Sometimes people don't wake up until the ground under them cracks." I sighed. "I raised him to protect people, Nora, not to run from them." She smiled sadly. "You raised him to be decent. Melissa taught him to be comfortable. There's a difference." When we hung up, I went to check on the kids again. Olivia was awake, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of the bed. "Can't sleep?" She shook her head. "I heard you on the phone," she whispered. I hesitated. "You did?" She nodded. "Was that Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart." Her voice cracked. "Is he mad at us?" "No," I said softly. "He's confused." She looked at me with those same brown eyes Daniel used to have when he was her age. Wide, searching, innocent. "Will he ever believe us?" I swallowed hard. "I think someday he will. But for now, you just focus on being a kid, all right? Let Grandma and her friend handle the hard stuff." She smiled faintly. "You mean the police lady?" I laughed quietly. "Yeah, the police lady." When she finally fell asleep, I sat there for a while longer, holding her small hand in mine. I thought about all the nights Daniel had probably told himself he was doing the right thing by keeping the peace, and I wondered how many families had been destroyed by that same lie. That silence is safer. It's not. Sometimes silence is the cruelest sound there is. Before going to bed, I wrote the day's entry in my journal. I described the call, the words he said, the moment he hung up. I ended the page with one line I didn't plan to write. It just came out. Sometimes the hardest person to fight for is the one you love most. I put down my pen and looked out the window again. The lighthouse beam swept across the sea, steady as always. Frank used to say that light doesn't need to chase the darkness. It just needs to keep shining until someone finds their way back. So that's what I decided to do. I'd keep shining. For Olivia, for Ethan, for Sophie, and maybe someday for Daniel too. It started with a text message from Melissa. "Hi, Mom. Great news. We're planning a new vlog. Family comeback, healing and togetherness. We'd love to film it at your house this weekend. The kids can be part of it. So authentic, right?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. For a second, I almost laughed. The same woman who abandoned her kids with a recovering heart patient now wanted to film her healing family video in my living room. But then I realized something. This was it. This was the chance we'd been waiting for. So I typed back, "Of course, dear. The house is always open." When I hit send, I didn't feel anger. I felt focus. That afternoon, I called Nora. "She's coming here," I said. "Saturday, to film her new family vlog." There was a short silence on the line, then Nora's voice. Sharp, alert, all business again. "Well," she said, "looks like our light show's getting an audience." We met that evening around my kitchen table, the same table that had become our command center. Thomas joined us too, wearing his thick lighthouse keeper jacket even indoors. He smelled faintly of salt and old coffee. "We'll call this," Nora said, tapping her notepad with a pen, "Operation Lighthouse." Thomas chuckled. "Sounds dramatic." "It should," Nora replied. "Drama is her language. Let's give her a story she can't edit." I smiled faintly. "So, what's the plan?" Nora spread out the folder. "Here's how it works. You play along, act warm, forgiving, exactly what she expects. Meanwhile, we'll document everything. Cameras here, here, and here." She pointed to 3 corners of the living room. "Hidden, she won't know." Thomas leaned forward. And I'll handle the light. The light? I asked. He nodded toward the window. That lighthouse beam, I can adjust it. There's a manual override. I can widen the beam, slow the rotation, and focus it right through that window at the exact time she films. You want symbolism? We'll give you symbolism. Nora grinned. Perfect. While she's busy posing for the camera, the truth will literally shine on her. It almost sounded poetic, if it weren't so practical. For the next 2 days, we prepared. Nora showed up with a box of equipment. Tiny cameras, memory cards, chargers, even a small microphone shaped like a flower pot. If she's going to perform, we might as well record the whole show, she said. I cleaned the living room until it looked spotless. Melissa loved clean backgrounds. Olivia helped me arrange the furniture exactly like it looked in one of her mother's old vlogs. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Grandma, Olivia said quietly while we worked, are you sure this is okay? I looked at her, this child who'd learned to carry too much. Sweetheart, sometimes people have to see themselves in the light before they understand what they've become. She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. Maybe that was a good thing. Friday night, Thomas came by to test the beam. He stood at the window, radio in hand, while Nora adjusted the settings from the lighthouse across the water. The light swept across the sky in wide, white arcs, bright enough to cut through the fog. Then, slowly, the beam shifted, landing right on my living room window. The entire room glowed, soft at first, then sharp and clear. Nora's voice came through the radio. How's that look? Thomas grinned, like Judgment Day. I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. When everything was ready, the three of us sat at the kitchen table again, tea steaming between us. Thomas took out his small notebook. You know, he said, it's funny. People think the lighthouse is there to guide ships home. But sometimes it's not about safety. Sometimes it's about showing what's already wrecked. Nora nodded. People think light saves sailors, but sometimes it exposes wrecks. I looked at them both and smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time we turned that light toward my family. Thomas lifted his cup. Then it settled. Saturday arrived crisp and bright, a rare clear morning after days of fog. I woke early and baked muffins so the house would smell warm, welcoming, harmless. When Melissa's car pulled into the driveway, I was ready. She stepped out in full makeup, wearing a pastel dress that matched her brand. Behind her came Daniel, looking uncomfortable, phone in hand as always. Mom, Melissa said brightly, walking in with her camera crew, 2 young men with lights and tripods. The house looks perfect. We'll do a quick sit-down shot by the window. The light here is amazing. I smiled sweetly. Yes, I said. The light here is something special. As she set up her ring light and adjusted her angles, Nora quietly monitored the hidden cameras from her laptop in the kitchen. Thomas, stationed in the lighthouse, waited for my signal. The plan was simple. Let Melissa speak freely. Let her script her fake comeback. And when she started talking about family healing, Thomas would turn the beam directly through the window, bright enough to wash out her filters, clear enough to catch every flicker of truth in her eyes. I took my seat across from her, pretending to be the proud, supportive mother-in-law she wanted for her show. She smiled for the camera, voice dripping with sweetness. Family means everything, doesn't it, Mom? I met her gaze. It sure does, dear, especially when the world's finally watching. And outside, right on cue, the lighthouse beam began to turn. Slow, steady, bright. From the kitchen, Nora whispered into her earpiece, lights on. The room filled with white. The crew squinted. Melissa blinked and frowned. What's happening to the lighting? She asked. I kept my smile. Oh, it's just the lighthouse, dear. Sometimes it gets brighter when the weather's clear. She looked uneasy but continued filming, talking about forgiveness, family, healing, the same words she'd built her fake empire on. Only this time there were witnesses, cameras, light. As I sat there across from her, I realized something. She wasn't just afraid of exposure. She was afraid of being seen, truly seen. Because for the first time, there was nowhere left to hide. That night, after they left, Nora and Thomas stayed for tea. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The footage was safe, backed up, and ready. I looked out the window toward the lighthouse. Its beam moved slowly across the sea, cutting through the dark like truth itself. She wanted the perfect backdrop, I said quietly. She forgot. Light reveals everything. Saturday night came faster than I expected. The kids were restless all day, Olivia biting her nails, Ethan pacing around the living room, Sophie clinging to my leg. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know what. By 6 o'clock, Melissa's car pulled up again, headlights flashing across the driveway. She came in with her camera crew, her perfect smile already in place, voice syrup sweet for the audience she hadn't even turned on yet. "All right, everyone," she said brightly. "Tonight's special. We're going live, a full live stream. Family come back, the Carter healing journey." Isn't that exciting? Daniel followed behind her, quiet as a shadow. He looked tired, older somehow. I could tell he didn't want to be there, but he didn't have the strength to fight. Melissa clapped her hands. "Kids, come sit by Grandma. Big smiles, okay? We're showing the world how strong families bounce back." I sat on the couch beside the children, my heart pounding, but my face calm. Nora stood quietly near the hallway door with her laptop. Thomas was at the lighthouse waiting for my call. Melissa counted down to her live stream. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. The camera light blinked red. "Hi, everyone," she chirped, waving at the lens. "Welcome back to our channel. I'm here with my wonderful family, my amazing mother-in-law, Evelyn, and our beautiful kids. We've been through so much, but love always wins, doesn't it?" Thousands of hearts and comments began flooding the screen. "You're such an inspiration. So happy your family is healing. This is what motherhood looks like." I looked at Olivia. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Ethan kept twisting the edge of his sleeve. Sophie's blank stare broke my heart. Melissa laughed, wrapping an arm around Olivia. "We're such a close family, aren't we, kids?" Her voice dripped with performance. That was my cue. I stood up slowly. She glanced at me, still smiling. "Mom, where are you going? We're live." "I know," I said, walking to the side table where the remote lay. "That's why it's the perfect time." I turned on the TV. For a second, the room filled with the bright glow of the screen. And then it started playing. The first clip was silent, shaky, footage from Thomas's phone last winter. Melissa standing outside by the lighthouse, posing in a white coat, doing slow yoga movements for the camera. Behind her, in the corner of the frame, 3 small children sat on the porch, shivering. Olivia was hugging Sophie under a blanket, Ethan rubbing his hands for warmth, their breaths visible in the cold. The live stream comments started moving faster. "Wait, is that recent? Those kids look freezing. What's happening?" Melissa froze. "What is this?" she demanded, still trying to keep her smile. "That's old, it's not?" Then the next clip played, her yelling at Olivia off camera. "Stop crying, you're ruining my shot." The chat exploded. "Is this real? Someone call CPS. Fake mom." Melissa's face drained of color. She lunged toward me. "Turn it off." But before she could reach the remote, Nora stepped out from behind the door, her police badge clipped to her belt, microphone in hand. Her voice was steady and sharp. "This broadcast is now under official review by Child Protection Services," she said. "All content, footage, and live interaction are being documented as evidence." The chat went silent for a beat, then erupted again. Melissa's eyes widened. "You can't do this. This is my channel." Nora didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself." Just then the front door opened. A woman stepped inside, Helen, Melissa's mother. She looked nothing like the confident woman I remembered from years ago. Her face was pale, her eyes wet. "Melissa," she whispered, "you lied to everyone, and including me." Melissa's lips trembled. "Mom, please, it's not what it looks like." But Helen wasn't listening. She looked at Olivia, who was crying silently. "Sweetheart, come here." Olivia stood up slowly, her small shoulders shaking. "Mom," she said through tears, "please stop pretending." The room went completely still. Even Daniel didn't move. He stood there staring at his daughter, and in that moment I saw something in him break. Melissa's voice cracked. "You all planned this, didn't you? You're humiliating me in front of everyone. You're destroying my career." Nora folded her arms. "We're not destroying anything. We're just showing what was already there." On the TV, the final clip played, Melissa leaving the kids at my doorstep saying, "You're home doing nothing anyway." Her own words, her own voice. The comments turned vicious. She left her kids? I used to follow her, unfollowing now. Where are those kids now? Melissa screamed. End the stream. End it now. But her cameraman didn't move. He just stood there, camera still rolling, eyes wide, realization setting in that this was the story of the year. Daniel finally stepped forward, his voice shaking. Melissa, what have you done? She turned on him, furious. You knew about all of this. You said nothing. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't want to know. And then he walked away. The live stream was still running. Thousands of people were watching in real time, not the polished family brand they'd been sold, but the truth unraveling right in front of them. Melissa sank to the floor, sobbing. You can't take them away from me, she said weakly. Nora knelt beside her. You already did. Afterward, CPS arrived to take statements. The house was filled with quiet chaos, officers moving gently, cameras unplugged, papers signed. Olivia sat beside me on the couch, holding Sophie in her lap. Ethan leaned against my shoulder. Is it over now, Grandma? He whispered. I nodded slowly. Almost, sweetheart. He looked at the dark TV screen and said, It's weird. Mom was smiling the whole time, even when she was lying. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just held him closer. When the house finally cleared out, only Nora, Thomas, and I remained. The kids were asleep upstairs. Nora sat at the table, typing up her report. Thomas stood by the window, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the sea. She wanted fame, I said quietly. She got exposure. Thomas nodded. Funny how the light always finds what people try to hide. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves crash outside. The storm had passed, but the air still felt electric. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to before. Peace. By morning, the house didn't feel like the same place. The night before had left a mark on everything. The walls, the air, even the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from peace, not yet. It was the heavy kind, full of aftershocks and truth too loud to ignore. Nora was the first to arrive. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her laptop was open before she even took off her coat. All footage is saved, she said, her voice flat but steady. The live stream was archived on 3 separate servers before it went down. It's already been forwarded to the Department of Child Protection and Family Court. I nodded, staring into my cup of tea. I hadn't even realized it had gone cold. Melissa? I asked quietly. Detained for questioning, Nora replied. They're not pressing criminal charges yet, but the neglect case is strong. You did the right thing, Evelyn. I let out a slow breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. She'll hate me forever, I said. Nora closed the laptop and met my eyes. She already did, but now those kids don't have to pay the price for it. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was raw, not angry, not defensive this time, just broken. Mom, he said, I didn't see. I swear I didn't see. I didn't answer right away. I thought of all the years he'd chosen silence, of all the moments he'd looked away. But I also thought of the boy he used to be, the one who'd promised his father he'd always do the right thing, no matter how hard it was. Daniel, I said softly, you didn't want to see. There's a difference. There was a long pause. Then through the phone I heard him start to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet sobs that came from somewhere deep. I thought I was protecting my family, he said, by keeping the peace, by not fighting her. But I see now. I was just protecting her lies. I closed my eyes. The good news is, the truth doesn't need your permission to exist. It's out now. It'll keep shining whether you're ready for it or not. He sniffed. Are the kids okay? They're sleeping, safer than they've ever been. There was a silence and then his voice again, low, almost like a prayer. Thank you, Mom, for saving them, for saving me too. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is enough. That afternoon, Helen came by. She looked smaller somehow, like all the armor she'd worn as a mother had finally cracked. She didn't speak at first. She just went straight to the couch, where the kids were curled up watching cartoons, and wrapped her arms around them. Olivia pressed her face into Helen's shoulder. Ethan didn't move, just leaned into the embrace. Sophie reached up and touched Helen's cheek. My poor babies, Helen whispered, her voice trembling. Your mother forgot what light means, but we'll remember, okay? We'll always remember. The children nodded. Helen looked at me through tears. She was always chasing brightness, she said, but she never understood what it cost. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Maybe now she will. When the sun set, the house was finally quiet again. Nora had left for the night, promising to call once she heard back from the agency. Helen stayed upstairs with the children, reading them stories until they fell asleep. I walked to the window, the same one that had framed so many of our battles, and looked out toward the lighthouse. Thomas had already turned on the light. It swept slowly across the dark horizon, steady and calm. The beam passed over the house, then across the sea, then back again, in perfect rhythm. It was strange how something so simple, light cutting through the dark, could feel like justice. I sat down at the table and opened my notebook. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake as I wrote. Today, the light became proof. The truth isn't just what we see, it's what we can no longer ignore. I stopped writing and looked up at the photo of Frank on the wall. He would have been proud. He'd always believed that the right thing might break your heart, but it would never break your soul. He was right. The children were safe. The lies were over. The light had done its job. Outside, the wind picked up, waves crashing against the shore, not violent, not angry, just alive. I leaned back in my chair and listened. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel alone. That night, the sea was wild. But my heart was finally calm. 3 months passed. It felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The hearings, the paperwork, the endless evaluations, it all blurred together until the only thing that mattered was the outcome. The court awarded me temporary guardianship of Olivia, Ethan, and Sophie. Daniel was granted joint custody under supervision, and Melissa was ordered to begin mandatory psychological treatment and was banned from social media for the next 2 years. The judge's words had been simple, steady, and final. The safety and emotional stability of the children must come first. For the first time in a long while, those words actually meant something. Life found a rhythm again, a softer one. Olivia started therapy and joined the school choir. Ethan discovered a love for puzzles and baseball. Sophie drew hearts on every piece of paper she could find. And me, I just tried to keep up. Mornings were quiet. Breakfasts were full of crumbs and laughter. The house smelled like cinnamon and crayons instead of antiseptic. Sometimes I caught myself pausing in the middle of folding laundry, realizing how peaceful the sound of normal could be. But healing isn't simple. Some nights, Olivia still woke up crying. Some afternoons, Ethan would stop mid-game and whisper, "Do you think Mom misses us?" And Sophie? She didn't ask. She just drew. The first supervised visit came on a rainy Thursday. The children were nervous, though none of them said it out loud. We drove to the family center together. The room they used for visits was bright and plain. Cheerful colors, soft toys, and that faint smell of disinfectant that never really leaves government buildings. Melissa was already sitting there when we arrived. She looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit. Her hair was tied back, her clothes simple, her face bare. No cameras, no ring light, just her. When the kids entered, she smiled, the kind of uncertain smile that trembles before it forms. "Hi, my loves," she said quietly. Sophie froze for a second, clutching the crayon drawing she'd been holding all morning. Then, slowly, she walked forward and handed it to her mother. "For you, Mommy," she said softly. "When you're better." Melissa stared at the paper. It was a picture of the 4 of them, Melissa, Daniel, and the 3 kids, holding hands under a big red heart. Above it, in Sophie's crooked handwriting, "Our family, someday." For a moment, Melissa didn't move. Then she covered her mouth with her hand and started to cry. Not the loud, dramatic kind, just quiet tears that slipped down, one after another. Olivia and Ethan stayed close to me. They didn't step forward, but they didn't step back either. And that was enough for now. After the session ended, Melissa looked at me for the first time. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix what I broke." I met her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see arrogance or denial. I saw a woman stripped of everything she used to hide behind. Image, pride, control. What was left was just a mother who had fallen too far to recognize her own reflection. "You start," I said quietly, "by remembering they're not your audience. They're your children." She nodded slowly, tears still falling. "Thank you for not giving up on them." I hesitated. "It wasn't you I did this for." That evening after we got home, the kids went straight to their rooms. I stood by the window with my cup of tea, watching the rain fade into mist. The lighthouse beam cut through the distance again, slow, calm, steady. It reminded me of what Thomas once said, "Light doesn't judge, it just reveals." Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not forgetting what happened, but refusing to let it poison what's left. Later that night, Daniel came by. He looked tired, but lighter somehow. He'd moved into a small apartment nearby and was slowly rebuilding his relationship with the kids, one dinner, one bedtime story at a time. "She looked different today," he said quietly, sitting at the kitchen table. "She's starting to see herself," I replied. "That's a kind of progress." He nodded. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "Every day," I said. "But right now, I'm just grateful they can sleep without fear." Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't deserve you, Mom." I smiled. "You don't have to. Just be the father they need now." He squeezed my hand gently, and for a brief second I saw that little boy again, the one Frank and I raised to believe in kindness and courage. Maybe that boy was still in there after all. When everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. Sophie's drawing was on the table beside me, the one she'd given Melissa. I traced the uneven red heart with my finger. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It doesn't mean letting someone back in just because they say sorry. It means letting go of the weight they left behind. Not for them, but for the ones who still deserve to breathe free. It means freeing the innocent first. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the lighthouse's glow sweeping across the window. Outside, the world was quiet. No more shouting, no more lies, just the soft rhythm of the waves. For the first time, it felt like peace had finally found its way home. 6 months later, the house didn't echo anymore. For years, every sound here used to fade too quickly, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break again. But now, laughter filled every corner, the kind of laughter that doesn't ask permission. Olivia's violin carried through the living room, a little off-key, a little shy, but beautiful. Ethan's wet footprints trailed across the floor after his swimming lessons with Thomas down by the pier. And Sophie? She never stopped moving. She darted from room to room, chasing sunlight, chasing Nora's dog, chasing joy itself. This was what peace looked like. Not perfect, just real. Every morning I made pancakes and burned at least one. Ethan always claimed the burnt one was his favorite, because it's crunchy, Grandma. Olivia rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. Sophie demanded extra syrup, and I gave it to her every time. After breakfast, we'd open all the windows. The sea breeze would sweep through, carrying salt and the faint sound of waves hitting rocks. Thomas's old radio would hum faintly from the lighthouse. Nora often stopped by with coffee and the kind of gossip only retired police officers could get away with. "Did you ever think," she asked once, "we'd end up running a daycare by the ocean?" I laughed. "You call it daycare, I call it a second chance." She grinned. "Fair enough." Sometimes in quiet moments I'd catch Thomas watching the children from the lighthouse balcony, his face soft. "They remind me," he said once, "why the light never stops turning, even on calm nights." I understood exactly what he meant. Daniel came by every weekend. He never missed one. He'd show up with groceries or the kids' favorite cereal, sometimes with flowers for the kitchen table. He was quieter now, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. He didn't talk about Melissa much, but he didn't have to. His actions spoke enough. He was learning to be present, to listen, to laugh again. Watching him read bedtime stories to the kids felt like watching something bloom after a long winter. And Melissa? She was still in treatment. She wrote letters sometimes. Simple ones. No manipulation, no excuses, just honesty. Her last one ended with, "Tell the kids I'm getting better. Tell them I'm trying to learn what love actually looks like." I did tell them, because even truth when broken deserves to be heard. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my desk by the window, the same one where this story began. The sea outside was calm, the lighthouse beam steady, and the smell of salt mixed with something new. Hope. I opened my journal, the one I'd filled for months with every memory, every fear, every truth. The pages had become a record of both pain and progress. I started writing. Melissa once said I was doing nothing. Maybe she was right, because sometimes doing nothing means letting the truth speak. I paused, smiling at the simplicity of it. All the fighting, all the sleepless nights, all the choices that felt impossible, they'd led here. To laughter in the mornings, to music in the afternoons, to peace at sunset. Olivia's violin started again upstairs, soft this time, a lullaby drifting through the floorboards. Ethan's laugh echoed faintly as he told a joke to Nora. And outside, Sophie's tiny sneakers squeaked against the porch as she tried to chase the last bit of daylight before bedtime. I closed my journal and walked to the window. Out on the horizon, the lighthouse turned, slow, patient, unwavering. Its beams stretched far across the water, touching the waves one by one. It had seen every moment of this journey, the fear, the lies, the storm, and now, the calm. For years, that light had been a warning, a signal for sailors to steer away from danger. But now, it felt different. Now it wasn't just guiding ships, it was guiding us home.